Brunswick Bay is very famous as being a beautiful seaside town on the Yorkshire coast. It's also famous for its fossils, but we're here for something a bit different today. We're looking for jet. Jet is the fossilised remains of monkey puzzle trees. And there's a fairly short stretch of coast along here where it can be found. Now we're going to have a really good poke around. We've got a couple of hours till the tide's completely low. And the places to look are pretty much at the high tide line. So we're going to have a really good poke around, see what we can find. Of course, identifying jet is the really tricky bit. What you're looking for are things that look as if they may want to be pieces of tree that are fossilised. Fortunately, there is a way of telling if what you've got is a jet. I'm pretty sure these bits aren't, but I'm going to give them a quick test. Bit of sandpaper, and what we're looking for is a cinnamon coloured or chocolate brown streak. Well, that's white, that's not. Oh, it's got a bit more brown to it, but still definitely not. That bit's black. Brownish coloured, still definitely not. Got to keep looking for a little bit longer. We had a little bit of technical difficulty on the beach, so we brought our findings home. We had some bits that we thought were looking really promising, but again, when we test them, dark streak, dark streak. That one's browner, still not right. This one though, this one I'm a bit more hopeful about. Oh look, we've got a nice cinnamon brown streak. We've got a bit of Whitby jet. Now, jet isn't the only jet-like substance out there. The other one that we work with a fair bit is Kimmeridge Shale, and that has a fairly similar streak, although it's a very, very different material. Let's have a look at where this comes from. Obtaining Kimmeridge Shale turned out to be quite an adventure. Kimmeridge is on the Dorset coast, and it's a very treacherous piece of coastline. The cliffs are absolutely sheer and sprinkle rocks on you the whole time. The tide comes in absolutely to the base of the cliffs, and there are numerous places where you can get cut off very easily. Added to that, that stretch of coastline is a site of special scientific interest, and that means it's protected by law. You cannot legally remove stones, fossils, or anything else from the beach without permission. So we sought permission. We had official documentation to say that we were allowed to remove an extremely small amount of shale for experimental and teaching purposes. And on a blustery day, we met up with Jane Stilley from Ancient Craft, disappeared out onto the beach and spent a very happy few hours poking around, identifying the shale and bringing just a tiny bit back with us. Now the shale itself is a very interesting structure. It's about 50% organic matter, which means it will burn if it gets hot enough. And it's the stuff that when compressed far enough will exude oil. It's also the stuff that in some parts of the world fracking is being experimented on. So it's a very interesting resource, and it's got an incredibly long history. It was used in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age and the Roman period for beads, for jewellery, for ornamental furniture. And it's a little different to work with to Whitby Jet. It tends to come in larger pieces to start with, but a very similar level of polish when it's finally worked up. Can be a tiny bit browner in tone. The reason why Gareth and I are out collecting interesting stones has to do with our work reconstructing archaeological artefacts. A look in any book on archaeology will show you amazing things. Spacer plate necklaces made out of Whitby Jet, wonderful braces made out of slate, shale and hard green stones. Amazing beads from around the world, there's some here in jet, some in amber, some in other materials. And then these beads, which are from a find on Dartmoor, are in Kimmeridge Shale. All of these dark stones get lumped together under the term jet-like materials. And unless you've got a good selection to work with, it's very hard to reconstruct different artefacts. You'll often find us at various museums and heritage sites demonstrating aspects of life in the past. And one of the things we really enjoy doing is demonstrating the ways in which people decorated themselves in prehistory. And this means working with things like jet, shale, and even amber and gold. Having got our raw materials, Gareth set out to make a pendant that showcased Kimmeridge Shale whilst we were demonstrating prehistoric adornment at Stonehenge earlier this year. He started with a fairly small pebble, if you like, of shale that was already heading in the right direction, and working mostly by grinding on a slightly gritty stone with lots of water, he reduced it to the right shape. Drilling was done using a bow drill with a flint and a bronze point. We did try both methods, both work quite well. You don't need a cutting edge per se with this sort of drill. With the bronze point, a little bit of sand and water in the hole will do the trick. A flint point obviously has a much sharper cutting edge in its own right. Once the shape's achieved, it can be polished by grinding with successively finer grades of stone and then rubbing on a piece of leather or a piece of cloth, and that brings up a really high shine. Carving a decoration into it isn't difficult to do using a flint tool, and the shale quite naturally acquires slightly different tones in the carved and the polished areas. We strung this pendant up with other pieces of jet, some of which were ones we carved, some of which were jet from other places around the world. It can be found in all sorts of interesting places. And we also included some little bits of amber in amongst it. And this necklace has now gone into the handling collection at Stonehenge, where it can be tried on by visitors and used as a teaching aid.